Good morning, party people, and welcome to Office Hours. Today, I actually need your help with some of the questions. And these aren't necessarily technical questions. These are questions about like professional development or career type stuff. And I want to get y'all's opinion over in chat. Good evening, Far SQL. Good morning, SQL Dev DBA. So for those of you who are watching live, you can talk about those answers in Twitch. For those of you who are watching the recordings, you can chime in as well over in the YouTube comments, and it'll actually come in handy for the folks who were asking the questions. Good morning, the Kazakh. Oh, we're getting really close to the point where I can do an office hours from the backyard too. I'm so excited about how that'll go down. So the first couple of ones I don't need your help with. These are fairly straightforward. So first off, Accidental DBA says, thanks for keeping your Q&A sessions entertaining and informative. You're welcome. Says, my question's non-technical. Have you ever said this to a client? You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. I don't think so. I know this is going to get me in trouble with people, but I didn't really like The Princess Bride. I know that that movie is really like desperately popular to the people who, like if you grew up with it and it meant something to you, then it probably means a lot to you. It didn't mean anything to me. I have really weird taste in movies, and that just did not do it for me at all. The movie that meant a lot to me growing up was Heathers with Winona Ryder and Christian Slater. And there are a lot of slang things that I've used out of those movies with clients, but nobody ever gets that because it was such an obscure movie. Next up, Renegade Larson, good to see you. Next up, we have Peter says, Brent, I would like to cobble some in-house SQL training. Are you okay with this? And if so, what credits do I need to attribute to you? Your best bet there is shoot me an email. Go over to brentozar.com and click contact up at the top and talk through it. You'd be surprised at how many companies have worked with me and said, you know what, we'd rather just license Brent's training for our staff. I have a bunch of corporate clients who just use my training for all of their employees. And then that way you don't have to waste time like rebuilding the wheel and it's already ready to go. So it happens all the time. Now comes into the questions where I need y'all's help over in chat. Jim asks, my employer is moving from SQL Server to AWS, like Postgres, Aurora, Glue, and Lambda. He says, when would it be an appropriate time for a seasoned SQL Server DBA to jump ship? When would it be time for an old dog to learn new tricks? I'm curious to hear what y'all say over in the comments, those of you who are watching the recording. Me personally, I have two kind of thoughts about this. One thought is if you can't get a job with the skills that you have, then it was already time to learn new tricks. You're like past the expiration date. But I don't think that there's going to come a time in the next 5-10 years where you're not going to be able to get a job with SQL Server. Because even though you think that the opportunities might be going down, at the same time, it's not like skilled new people are coming in by the truckload for SQL Server. We've always had a skills shortage problem because it's an expensive product and it's kind of hard to learn. But the other thing that I would answer about this is when you're tired of working with that technology, if you're tired of SQL Server and you look at some of the other stuff, and I hit that personally in my own career, I got tired of SQL Server, I got frustrated with SQL Server for a while, and I switched over and used Postgres and Aurora for a while. And it was refreshing to be challenged. Like I enjoyed not knowing what I was doing and having to like relearn some things from scratch. I personally found that enjoyable. But I'd be curious to see over in the comments when y'all think it would be appropriate for an old dog to learn new tricks. SQL Dev DBA says, for an answer, he says, wrong screen there. He says, I'd say for me it depends on how experimental I'm feeling. Oh, he's thinking about doing shrooms. He says, some folks just don't want to learn because they don't want to leave their comfort zone. I'd agree with that too. When you become good at something, it is scary to leave your comfort zone and have to learn something new. Also, your career and your personal life will ebb and flow. Jeff Dines, thanks for the Prime subscription. Your personal life will ebb and flow. There will be times in your life where you have more time or less time to do things like learning new technologies. So there are times in your life where you have to take care of relatives, where you have to be a good parent, you're going through something struggling, a health issue for yourself, and you may not be able to spend the time to learn. Oh, the renewal thing is over at an odd place here. Let's move that. There we go. That's better. At yahoo.com renewed their subscription. Thank you. The Kazakh says, I mean no disrespect, but it can also be difficult for an old dog to join young in terms of new tricks. I'm talking about CVs being overlooked because of age difference, which can also be an expense difference. Like sometimes companies see, and no disrespect taken at all, you're absolutely right. Sometimes companies see more senior people, like in terms of older, as being more expensive. And so they may be more interested in going with a younger, less experienced person in order to lowball them in terms of salary. SQL Dev DBA says, and if the company is willing to pay for training on the clock, then that's a great way for you to go and learn and just see if something is right for you, to see if you find it interesting. Renegade says, I've never been so busy. I know I've had the same experiences too myself. He says, SQL Server will survive, but I always try to learn new topics. And I do too, because I just like to be exposed to new stuff. It's fun for me to learn new things. I may not want to get good at it. I may not want to get good enough at it that I could actually charge money for my skills on it. That's usually my feeling on Postgres. I'm not to the point where I could charge money for my skills there, but it's just fun to learn. Morse says, I moved jobs when I asked for a more appropriate role as a database administrator. I was rejected and found another company. I just had to train on Ozar's classes. That's good to hear. My journey into database administration was kind of the same thing. Once I discovered that I wanted to become a full-time database administrator, in order to get that line on my title, like to officially say DBA, the only way that I could do it was to change companies. Because if I stayed at the same company, they were just like, yeah, you do the database work here, but you also do all these other things, and we're going to put your, like architect or whatever on your title instead. And I'm like, no, I want to be a DBA. I want that to be my only thing. Let's see, next one that I want your feedback on here. Next one I want your feedback on, Anatole asks, what are your thoughts on office versus remote versus hybrid work requirements for SQL DBAs? Has COVID forever changed this requirement? My personal thought, when COVID hit, I was like, it's going to be long, but it's going to be temporary. It's not going to be permanent. There are always going to be managers who want people in the office with them. And they're going to have to pay a premium for that because now a lot of people really love working remotely. People are used to being around their families more. People hate commuting. Renting has changed. All kinds of things have changed about the property market. But there are still some companies, I have some clients who still insist on people being in the office a certain number of days of the week. And if you have to be in the office even just one day a week, well, then you might as well have to be located in the same city where the office is, which just kind of changes your financial setup with that company. SQL Dev DBA says, as a hiring manager, I love that the talent pool is so much bigger with remote. I would also add, not only is the talent pool bigger, it's better. Because the people who are truly good at what they do can choose which jobs they want, and they will choose to work remotely more often than not because they have more leverage. Now, I'm not saying that the best people don't ever want to work in person. I liked working in an office from time to time, but in order to get the best people possible, you're going to have flexibility on the remote thing. Um, I don't think it was just COVID. I think it's also just outsourcing has been a thing for a long time. Offshoring has been a thing for a really long time. Globalization has been a thing for a really long time. But it's just COVID has accelerated that people work from wherever. Next up, let's see here. Now back to the questions that I can answer. Fundamentals Newb says, "Hey Brent, I get a many duplicate plans warning when I run SP Blitz Cache. We have one developer and his resources are spent. What should I do?" Well, that warning, if you read the URL that's involved with it, that warning is really just telling you that you have this problem on the server. But you might have lots of problems on the server. Your job as a performance tuner is to find the biggest problem on the server and focus your resources and their resources on that one thing. In order to do that, check out my Mastering Server Tuning class. Mastering Server Tuning, the very first module in that class, talks about how to measure your SQL Server, figure out which wait type is your biggest bottleneck, and then figure out what problems are causing that bottleneck. So that's my Mastering Server Tuning class. Next up, Miles asks, "Hi Brent, how do I tell if my SQL Server needs more memory?" Guess what? My Mastering Server Tuning class. In the very first module, we talk about how to measure your SQL Server, find your biggest bottleneck, and then figure out what problems are causing that bottleneck and how to mitigate them. That's my Mastering Server Tuning class. Good morning, Guaronet. Next up, Miles asks, "Hi Brent, how can we determine when a query can't be further tuned?" That's my... No, that's not actually a class. This is a really good question. He continues with, "When do you decide that the query needs more hardware resources? When do we stop tuning a query?" What I like to do when someone hands me a query to tune is I say, "How long would you like me to spend working on this query? 1 hour, 1 day, or 1 week?" It's, for those of you who haven't spent a week tuning a query, that can seem kind of strange, but sometimes someone hands you a 10,000 line long stored procedure and it takes a really long time to even figure out what's going on inside there. Hey, Cheaton. So 1 hour, 1 day, or 1 week. And at the end of that, at the end of that time period, I go back to them and I say, "Okay, here's the progress I was able to make. How much longer would you like me to spend working on this? 1 hour, 1 day, or 1 week?" Then that way they can get a really quick feel for what kind of progress I'm making. And if I've spent a day and they go, "You haven't really improved things much," then that can be the sign where it's time to either throw hardware at the problem or bring in someone else who may have more experience query tuning. I'm not saying that as a sales pitch for my stuff. It can also be a sales pitch for you to attend training classes so that you can do a better job on tuning that kind of thing. But that's the way that I measure that with clients. Next up, BJ asks, "Hi Brent, what do you think about Entity Framework operations as a solution for high-performance OLTP databases for a large number of transactions?" When you're building an app for the first time, I recommend that people should start with things like Entity Framework and ORMs, because when you get started building an application, it's really hard to build everything that you want. You got to ship features really quickly, and ORMs like Entity Framework are awesome for shipping things quickly. Over time, as the application becomes larger, and we talk like 10,000 batch requests a second, even 1,000 batch requests a second, that 1,000 batch requests a second, you may not get the performance that you want from ORM tools. So now the thing though is you said insert, update, or delete operations. Entity Framework is actually really good at that. If all you're doing is single inserts, updates, and deletes, Entity Framework can do 1,000 batch requests a second really easily. The problem that I usually run into under high throughput concurrency workloads is not Entity Framework, it's the number of indexes on the table. The Rossi says EF Core is a pain for tuning queries, so EF Core is great for only basic database interactions. Well, that's exactly what the person is saying here. BJ is saying CRUD operations, single insert, update, or delete. That is one of the things that Entity Framework is awesome at, so I would leave it right there. Next up, Confused Dev says, Hi Brent, my friend says that a query is faster if it's only using tables from one database rather than two databases on the same server. Is there any truth to that? Why is it my job to answer that question? If your friend told you that the world is flat, whose job is it to debunk that? Is it my job? No. If your friend tells you something, it is your friend's job to prove it. So ask them to show you. And then there you go. SQL Dev DBA says, that's why I put all my objects in master. There you go. Oh, Miles asks an interesting question. Hi, Brent. We have usage of MSDTC transactions for a vendor-specific database. These transactions sometimes cause heavy blocking. My question is, why do people use distributed transactions? Distributed transactions are usually used when you have to coordinate inserts, updates, deletes, selects, for that matter, across several databases and furthermore, several servers. For example, maybe you need to insert a row in a sales table on one server. At the same time, you need to update quantity in stock on a different server. Coordinating that transaction work and holding the locks open the whole time, that's the work of distributed transactions. It says, can we avoid them? Sort of. You can, if you want to say, for example, do all of the work in one database or on one server. So sometimes we find out that people have spread their databases across half a dozen really cheap servers, and our answer is to migrate everything onto one beefier server. Then you don't have the overhead of trying to coordinate transactions across a bunch of potatoes. That's one way to solve it. Another way to solve it would be to rewrite the application from scratch so that it does things in a more asynchronous or queued manner. But the place that I'd probably start is making sure that you bring all those databases together onto the same server so that commits can simply happen faster. Next up, Don't Bother Asking says, today my requested me do. Sometimes I wonder what y'all type with. If y'all have like a beer can in one hand and your peanut butter covered fingers are all over the other keyboard. It's not like these questions are long. I mean, they're short and you can't even manage something that, what are your queries? I know what your queries look like, for that matter. Today, my requested me do something sessions were stuck in rollback. As far as I know, Renegade says I use Google Translate. As far as I know, there is nothing that can be done. We must wait for all the rollback and killed sessions to complete. Correct. Is there any new functionality in SQL Server 2022 for long-running rewind operations? Yes. I want to say it was 2019, actually. What the hell was that feature called? Accelerated Database Recovery, ADR, Accelerated Database Recovery. If you search for Brent Ozar Accelerated Database Recovery, there is a blog post and demo that I wrote showing you exactly how it works. And it really does work the way that I show in the demo. So that's kind of cool. Next up, Miles says, Hi Brent, when do implicit data type conversions become costly? Our vendor database lacks control over design and data types. How do I convince the app team about scaling issues with growing data? You're coming at it backwards, Miles. Instead of saying, I've got this problem, let me convince people that it's the thing they should work on, what you want to do is look at your SQL Server's top weight type and then figure out what that weight type, what's causing that weight type. This is what I talk about in my mastering server tuning classes. And Miles, you've asked several questions actually that are all covered inside my training classes. this is your sign, Miles, that it's time for you to start attending those training classes. And I don't say that in a condescending way. It's that you're starting to ask expert level questions and you just don't find the answers to those things in Google anymore. That's when it's time to start investing in yourself and getting your employer to invest in yourself so that you can answer those questions. I wish that I could explain them quickly in the span of like a 60-second answer, but that's why I teach training classes. That's also why I do webcasts like this, because a lot of things don't need training classes that I can just answer them right away. That's not the case here. DadJokerDetroit says, if a large number of database administrators go to a restaurant, should they be allowed to join tables? Nicely done. Nicely done. The reality is that probably no, because most of them are loners who drink by themselves, so they would just go over to a bar instead and they would all cry in their booze together and complain, sadly. Ramesh asks, is there a good way to identify which SQL clients are using older, outdated drivers? I have no idea. That's a really good question. I have no idea. I don't think I've ever had a performance problem. I focus most of my work on performance stuff. I don't think I've ever had a performance problem that was solved by updating the drivers. There might be one out there. The question that I'd turn around and ask you is, why do you care? Why does it matter what version of the drivers your clients are using? That's probably the place that I'd start. Next up, let's see here. Might be a stupid question, and this isn't. This is not a stupid question at all. Might be a stupid question says, hey Brent, I know you typically say to store files in a file system. With the popularity of data lakes, would you feel comfortable storing files here too? Absolutely. I love data lakes. Data lakes are phenomenal when you have a whole bunch of files that need to be analyzed over time. I have like 3 examples off the top of my head, and I can't say them because I'm restricted by client NDAs. But I can think of a lot of like transactional data that changes all the time, like the shape of it changes all the time, and it's easier to dump and deal with in a data lake. So I'm a huge fan of it. Morse says, on an unrelated, going back to the joining at empty tables, Morse says, I'm hoping to see some of you at the PASS Summit in Seattle. I'm not personally going this year because it's the exact same week as the Formula One races in Las Vegas. Woohoo! I've been waiting for this for absolutely forever. So this is the first year, and I believe it's coming for the next 3 years too, that Las Vegas is having Formula One races here. It goes right down the strip. It's in the middle of the night, so it's going to be an amazing, glamorous type setup with the lights of Vegas plus the screaming F1 cars racing around the strip. That's just an amazing opportunity, and I can't wait to see that. And unfortunately, it's the exact same week as PASS, so I'm going to be staying in Las Vegas for that week. But for the rest of you, I highly recommend the PASS Summit. It's a great way to meet people, to have fun, to learn all kinds of things about not just SQL Server, but other technologies as well. That's the PASS Data Community Summit. If you search Google for PASS Data Community Summit in Seattle, it's in November this year. And I'm going to be talking about it a little bit more on the blog, too, next week as well. SQL Dev DBA says there's no fake boats or water like we got in Miami. Well, we do have genuinely real water. But I do have to point out that, like everything else in Las Vegas around water, there's problems with water conservation, too, as well. Vlad DBA says, finally made it on time to a live stream. Welcome. Renegade says, where is the invite? My invite? I have my invite. You're going to have to work on your own invite because F1 races are unbelievably expensive. It's crazy town expensive. Next up, Don't Bother Asking says, is it preferable to have a DBA team for all sorts of databases, such as SQL Server, Oracle, Cassandra, whatever, or is it better to have distinct DBA teams for each? My friend posed this question since he intends to combine all DB support teams onto a single DBA team. For me, it comes down to the number of people you have in each team. If the SQL Server team has 2 people, and the Oracle team has 2 people, and the MongoDB team has 2 people, then it's really hard to do on-call rotations. It's really hard to have people take vacations. It's really hard to deal with sick time. And it can help to have more of those people inside the same team and start to cross-pollinate them. But one of my clients on the other extreme has 14, 20, 25 people in their SQL Server team at any given moment because they have so much contracting, people doing all kinds of short-term projects. So it doesn't make any sense for those people to be on the same team as the Oracle people or MongoDB because there's so much coverage in terms of on-call rotation, vacation time. There's not really any need for knowledge sharing because there's so much depth on those teams. Greg. Good to see you, Greg at BMW. Next up, Manto asks, do you prefer to use Azure ephemeral disks for local TempDB or disk read cache? For me, it's local TempDB all day, every day. Because I've never seen a really dramatic speed boost when using it for disk read cache, because the read cache isn't sizable enough to deal with the kinds of databases that people have out there. You could also conceive, I'm going to leave it there. I've always used it for TempDB for that reason. Next up, Manto says, for performance reasons, does sector size matter for Azure SQL VM ephemeral drive used for TempDB? If so, what is your recommendation? I have not benchmarked that in 15 years, like the sector size for TempDB, because, DK Kimball likes my hair. Because if you're doing so much writes to TempDB that you start to worry about a 5% or 10% speed difference in terms of the sector sizes, then you have a bigger problem to begin with. Microsoft, for like 10 years, has cached as much as possible in memory for TempDB, and it only hits disk when you come under memory pressure. So if you're coming under that much pressure for TempDB, a 5 or 10% performance improvement isn't what you want. You really want to look at which queries are using the most TempDB and go for that from there. So because of that, I don't sweat it. I just use 64K NTFS allocation units and call it a day. And then we'll do one more. Let's see here. Don't Bother Asking says, have you had any experience with Liquibase as a tool? Not even a little bit. Absolutely not. I have no idea. Could be good or bad. I don't mean to, for the definitely not meaning to make it sound like it's negative. I've just never touched it. So because that answer was so short, we'll do another one. Let's see here. Oh, Nyland Dude, welcome. Let's see here. Philip asks, I've got VM Snapshots and Database Backups. How do you see the best setup for a standalone SQL VM where the infrastructure team wants to do VM Snapshots as well as Database Backups? What does the infrastructure team want to do? Are you trying to argue with them? Are you trying to tell them no? For me, if someone else wants to do backups, I'm like, go for it. But about a week after you start doing backups, I'm going to do 2 tests. First, I'm going to give you a call, open a help desk ticket, whatever, at, say, 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And I'm going to say, right now, the clock starts. Give me a restore of that database to the most recent time possible. Go restore it over on another server or restore it under another name. The time starts now. Let's just say it's 2 p.m. And when that database comes up, I want you to look at 2 things. The first thing you look at is, when did the clock stop? How long did it take in order to do the restore? The second thing I want you to look at is, look in the database and see when the data is as of. Look at the most recent order, the most recent status date. Because then maybe they only restored it to the previous night or to 4 hours ago. Those 2 numbers are called your RPO and RTO. You take those 2 numbers over to the business and you say, hey, just so you know, It took the infrastructure team 47 minutes in order to restore a database backup. And when they restored it, the data was 6 hours old. Is that okay? And if the business says yes, then you're good. If the business says no, it's not your problem. You simply introduce the business people over to the database or to the backup people and then let them sort it out. But it's not your job when someone else takes over the backups. There's a great quote from Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. That's the way that you trust but verify. Hackology says, love the info and the questions on the stream. Followed. I appreciate it. Awesome. Well, that wraps up our office hours for today. I'll do another one tomorrow around about the same time. Now I am getting ready to go out for breakfast. Now, a friend of mine, a database administrator from Georgia, is staying with us, hanging out this week in Vegas, doing pool time and driving around in the Jag. And so I'm going to go hang out, grab breakfast with him. And then today we are checking on the status of my Porsche 356. I have a 1964 Porsche 356 that's getting restored in at Gowden Porsche here in Las Vegas. So we're going to go stop in there. They've invited me in to tour the warehouse at 1 p.m. today. We'll go in and take a look and see all the cool Porsches that are in for service. Take a look and see how mine's coming along. I think it's really close, so I'm super excited about that. SQL Dev DBA says, any Dead by Daylight coming up? Not this week. Let me look at the calendar and see what I'm doing, because I don't honestly do what I'm doing. Oh, next week I do have office hours both days too. So next week I have office hours both days. I probably will do Dead by Daylight at least one day, at least one morning next week. Now that I have my whole live stream set up inside there. Plus, next week is the last office hours for like 2 months. Because after next week, I go head to Iceland, Sweden, and Norway on a big 3-month-long journey. So 3-week-long journey. 3 weeks, not 3 months. So thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see y'all tomorrow at the next office hours. Adios.